Do you want to increase your score on the English section of the ACT? Welcome to my new series where I've compiled my resources that I've used over the years to tutor multiple students to help them increase their sub-scores on the English section of the ACT. Welcome back. Lesson 2 is going to build on what we discussed in Lesson 1, where I really focused on avoiding redundancy on the ACT. Here's a quick reminder that on the English section of the ACT, you only have 45 minutes in which to answer a total of 75 questions. So one of the things that I'll give you tips on is how to work with speed. I like to call Lesson 2, when in doubt, take it out. All right, so here's the first question. So the whole passage is going to be entitled, The Oldest NFL Team. The Phoenix Cardinals are the oldest, most long-established, longest-playing football club in the National Football League, or NFL. Look at the underlined portion. Now, if you were with me in Lesson 1, you know that the ACT likes using the shortest, simplest way to say something. So just by looking at this, can you answer this on your own in 2 seconds? 2, 1, what did you say? If you answered B, oldest, you would be correct. Most long-established, longest-playing, oldest, most long-established, longest-playing, all of that is incredibly wordy, and we can still retain the meaning of what we need in just the one word, oldest. Question number 2. Look at the underlined portion. 1880s during the 19th century. F, no change. G, 1880s. H, the 19th century. Or J, during the 1800s. Okay, so look at choice H for a second. If I were to replace the 19th century with where the underlined portion is, the sentence would say that they began sometime in the 1870s or the 19th century. Now think about that. That doesn't make any sense, or it means that they would have to be different, right? And the 1870s, like anything in the 1800s, that is the 19th century. So that doesn't make any sense. So I know immediately that I can eliminate choice H because that just doesn't make any sense. Look at choice J, during the 1880s. Okay, so yes, I know that I'm talking about the 1880s here, but notice how it has 2 words in front of it, during the. Okay, now look at the original sentence. Look at where it says 1870s before the underlined portion. Does it say during the 1870s? No, it just says in the 1870s. So we want to keep things parallel. So if it doesn't have during the, then why do we have to have it? We don't. So I can eliminate choice J because that just makes it wordier. So there you go. That leads us to the correct answer. G, that retains the meaning and says it in the shortest, simplest way possible. And it also keeps that sentence parallel in the 1870s or 1880s. Question 3. At that time, the Cardinals were an amateur team that did not play for money. So as we look at that underlined portion, can we leave that there? Or can we replace it with that they were an amateur team that played for the pure joy of the sport, that played on a non-professional level? Or D, omit the underlined portion and end the sentence with a period. Okay, so here is a strategy that I like to use, and I always warn you, I'm not saying that anytime omit is one of your answer choices. That does not mean that 100% of the time that's going to be answer, because that's not true. It's not the answer 100% of the time, but I have found that it is the answer most of the time. So if you are strapped for time, let's say you're at the end and you look at the clock and you only have just a few more minutes left on this section, you need to probably work with a little more speed. So what I would do is I would consider choice D first before I look at my other options, A, B, and C. So would the sentence make sense and retain the same meaning if I just got rid of everything that's underlined? So I look at that sentence. At that time, the Cardinals were an amateur team, period. Well, we know what the word amateur means, and it pretty much means the same thing that the underlined portion says, that maybe B says, or that even C says. That's another thing I notice. I notice that choice A, B, and C are all kind of similar because they all kind of describe what amateur means. Now, that tells me that there's one answer that kind of sticks out as being different than the others. And a lot of times when you see one sticking out and the other choices are very similar, probably that different one is going to be the answer. And in this case, yes, D is going to be the answer. Not playing for money, playing on a non-professional level, playing for the pure joy of the sport, those are all meanings that we can understand from just the word amateur. So we really don't need that underlined portion. We retain the meaning of the sentence without it. And remember from lesson 1, the ACT wants the writing to be very short, sweet, and clear and to the point. Question 4. There was nothing in the world which so much as resembled pro football in those days. F, no change. G, let's try substituting it. There was anything like pro football in those days. Let's try substituting H. There was no such thing as pro football in those days. And then J, there was not even a dream of pro football in those days. So when I substituted that, which one really sounded more natural and made more sense? Well, we automatically should know that nothing in the world which so much is resembled is way too wordy. So I know that I can eliminate F, no change, as a choice. So really I'm left with the rest, and I see that G and J are really kind of similar. It's just better. It's clearer to just say no such thing as. That sounds clearer and much more natural. Question 5. And the game they played was football, no doubt about it. Okay, so the whole passage, if you remember the title of it, it talks about the oldest NFL team. So, it's kind of understood that the whole passage, what sport are we talking about? We're talking about football. So the fact that it's saying, and the game they played was football, that's kind of unnecessary, right? And then you've got B, no doubt about it. You've got C, to be assured it was football. Or D, omit the underlined portion and end the sentence with a period. So does the sentence retain the same value and the same meaning without everything underlined? Absolutely, yes, it does. So once again, D, omit the underlined portion, is the correct answer. Question 6. None of the other clubs in the NFL was formed before the league itself was established in 1919. When the NFL was first established, the Cardinals remained aloof and thumbed their noses at it. So look at our answer choices. We leave it the same. G, we just use the word aloof. H, aloof and tried to ignore it. Or J, off in their own corner. So if you understand the meaning of the word aloof, that should be enough, right? What's the shortest way to answer this? The simplest way? Yes. Choice G. All right, question 7. Professional football had a bad reputation, and the Cardinals were greatly prideful of their record as amateurs. However, in 1921, the Cardinals decided to join the NFL. Look at the underlined portion, were greatly prideful. So should we leave it the same? B, full of great pride, C, proud, or D, gratefully proud? All right, so if you're catching on, C, proud, does it retain the same meaning? And the Cardinals were proud of their record as amateurs? Absolutely. And it's the simplest way to say it. Again, the shortest answer in this case is the correct answer. Question 8. They were required to play a game to the death with the Chicago Tigers. The Detroit Tigers are a baseball team. So, do we leave it there? Or do we replace it with G, not to be confused with the Detroit Tigers, a baseball team? H, not the more famous modern-day Detroit Tigers baseball team. Or J, omit the underlined portion and end the sentence with a period. So if I were taking the test, if I were strapped for time, I would probably just think about it and think, okay, look at J. It says omit there in those big capital letters. That's probably what I should consider first. So would this sentence mean the same thing? They were required to play a game to the death with the Chicago Tigers. Okay, so remember, this whole passage is about one sport and one sport only. It's about football. So the fact that it's throwing in, mentioning the name of a baseball team is probably irrelevant. So yes, I can absolutely get rid of that. And look at my other choices. My other choices are really too similar. They're kind of out there in left field, as it were. So again, we need to stay away from baseball. We're talking about football here. And J, omitting it, would be the correct answer. Question 9. Whichever team won would be allowed to stay in Chicago. The other team would have to move. The Cardinals won. The Tigers moved away and soon went bankrupt. All right, look at that underlined portion again. The other team would have to move. Or should I say the other team would be forced to move along? Or the other team would be legally obliged by injunction to relocate their franchise? Wow, that's super wordy. Or D, the other team would be obliged to be moving out. Wow, that's completely unnecessary. Way too many words there in all of those choices. And the correct answer is that first one right there, no change. It retains a very simple, clear meaning. The other team would have to move. So in this case, A, no change, is the correct answer. Question 10. Ironically, the team that fought to stay in Chicago eventually moved away. The Cardinals were rarely as successfully able to win games or make money as the Chicago Bears, their crosstown rivals. Okay, so the underlined portion, successfully able to win games. Well, I mean, if you're winning a game, you're being successful, right? So that in itself tells us that F, no change, is not going to be the answer because that's redundant. The other choices, G, successful at winning, H, winning or profitable a team, all of that, unnecessary. If I replace it with J, the sentence would read, the Cardinals were rarely as successful as the Chicago Bears, their crosstown rivals. And just reading it that way makes so much more sense. The extra words just make the sentence way more confusing and a little harder to follow. So here again, the shortest answer is the correct answer because remember, we need to be economical with our words because that's what the ACT considers as the best style of writing. All right, moving on to question 11. Fans gradually deserted the Cardinals, so the team moved to St. Louis in 1958 and to Phoenix in 1986, seeking a more profitable market. Maybe Phoenix is the place in which the Cardinals are destined to stay. Okay, so right away, I have that D omit. So let's test that. Let's test that here. So if I omit it, the sentence would read, maybe Phoenix, the Cardinals are destined to stay. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that doesn't make any sense. That's not a complete sentence. Okay, so I've checked choice D omit, and when it doesn't work like that, then you know that in this case, this is one of the cases where omit is not going to be the answer. All right, so look at our other two choices. is the place at which, is the place in which. Both of those are very similar. And honestly, they sound like, you know how when your teacher gives you a word requirement on an essay, you have to write at least 500 words. So a lot of times students will be as wordy as possible just because they're trying to get to a certain word count and be done with it. That's when you see writing like this, and it's bad writing. So the correct answer here is C. Maybe Phoenix is where the Cardinals are destined to stay. So C is the correct answer. Question 12. Some people say that the name cardinal was a 19th century name for a mythical bird that arose from its own ashes in the fireplace, and that the cardinals date back. Okay, so let's look at that underlined portion really quickly. In the fireplace. Okay, so the word before that is ashes. Okay, so maybe stop and think about this. Ashes in the fireplace. Is it really necessary to have that there? I'm saying that because I see that one of my answer choices is J, omitting the underlined portion. And that's kind of what I'm leaning toward. I don't really think that it's really necessary to clarify where these ashes are, whether they're in the fireplace or somewhere else. And I look at my other answer choices and it says G, that had consumed it, H, created by the fire that had consumed it. So by looking at everything else and considering everything, my first instinct is to just go with what's shorter and what still retains what's important. And what's important is ashes, not that they're in the fireplace or anywhere else. So in this case, again, when omitting that underlined portion is a choice, again, this one is the answer. Question 13. Okay, look at this sentence and look at the very end of it. So I have parentheses and it says, or maybe not. Okay, so this is a style choice, and think about the passage as a whole. So the passage as a whole seems to be sort of like this informative style of writing. And so by incorporating something that seems kind of like an ad lib, or maybe not, it kind of seems like more conversational and less formal. So my first instinct is to say that maybe in this style of writing, in this type of essay, I really don't need to have something like that there. So look at my answer choices. D, omit the underlined portion and end the sentence with a period. That's going to be my first instinct. If I consider the other answer choices, I don't know what C is talking about. That's completely out there. So again, D here, omitting the underlined portion and simply ending the sentence with a period is the best choice. Question 14. Chicago is proud to rise from its ashes like the mythical cardinal. The name that is more common for that mythical firebird is the phoenix. F, no change. G, common name. H, name that is famous. Or J, common way of speaking. Okay, so what's the simplest and shortest, most clear way I can say this? Probably not the first choice. What if I said the sentence by substituting it with choice G? The common name for that mythical firebird is the phoenix. That's pretty clear. That's pretty to the point. If I replace it with H and J, that's totally wordy and unnecessary. So yes, G is the correct choice for that answer. All right, so question 15. All right, so you may see these types of questions. They're typically toward the end, the very last question of a particular passage. So look at how the answer choices over here on the right-hand side are constructed. So you have choice A and B, both begin with the word yes, and choice C and D both begin with the word no. So again, let's say this was the last question on the last passage and you are down to the last minute of your allotted time for the English section. Okay, now again, we should always know that when you're running out of time, whether you've had time to answer or not, you've got to fill in those bubbles. Remember that, the ACT is scored according to what you get right, not what you get wrong. So you never, ever, ever want to leave anything blank. So if you're about to run out of time, just make sure that, you bubble in something. However, here's a strategy that helps me answer things really quickly. So notice how two of them say yes and two of them say no. So I don't even look at anything else. I kind of draw an imaginary line between choice B and C. And I say to myself, okay, I'm going to read this question and I'm going to answer it myself before I look at any of my choices. I'm going to answer to myself yes or no and justify it. Okay, so look at this last sentence of the passage. Chicago was proud to rise from its ashes like the mythical cardinal. The name that is more common for that mythical firebird is the phoenix. So the question is, suppose the author wishes to add a new paragraph at the end of the existing passage, quickly summarizing the history of Canadian football. Would this be appropriate in light of the context and style of the rest of the passage? So without looking at any of my answer choices, I'm going to answer this question with a yes or a no. And my first instinct when I think about it is going to be no. Just by answering a yes or no question, what I've done is essentially I have already automatically narrowed my answer choices down to C or D. Now, if I'm strapped for time, I'm probably not even going to even consider or read choice A or B. So that cuts down some time just in simply having to read that. Now, before I look at what C and D have to say, try to justify the no in your mind. Okay, so I'm saying no because when it proposes to summarize the history of Canadian football, to me, that just is a little off topic. That's off topic to me because I remember the title. The title is the oldest NFL team. So what does NFL stand for? The National Football League. What nation are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the USA. So why do I have to incorporate another country, Canada, in this? Also, the different cities that we've discussed in this passage were Chicago. We talked about Phoenix. We talked about St. Louis. We were talking about American cities here. So in my mind, I'm saying no because I feel like adding on tacking on a something at the end about a different country is just irrelevant. So let's look at my answer choices. C says no because the passage does not focus on sports history. Okay, well, I'm not agreeing with that because isn't this passage kind of talking about sports history? Yeah, I think it's talking about, football in the United States and some of the team's history. So I'm really not agreeing with C. So looking at D, it says no because the passage has nothing to do with Canadian football. Okay, so that goes along with exactly what I said before I looked at any of my other answer choices. And so let's just say this was the last passage of the entire English section and I only had 15 seconds to answer. I could, with confidence, put down D as my choice. I didn't even have to read A and B. I didn't have to waste any time reading that. And, just for the sake of, looking at this now, look at A says yes, because it's only fair to mention Canadian football at least once in the passage. No, that's not true. B, yes, because the Phoenix Cardinals now play Canadian. That has nothing to do with anything, right? So yes, D is the correct choice. So I hope that the next time you see a question like this, you use that strategy by answering yes or no for yourself before you even look at your answer choices and try to justify it in your mind. And that's going to lead you to the correct answer so that there's no way you're reading all of this and stressing over it and getting confused and second guessing yourself. Because remember, a lot of times your first instinct is the correct answer. So I hope that these tips helped you. Join me in lesson 3 as we build on what we've learned and we get into a little more grammar. I hope to see you there.